is happening, everybody? All right, so the end of a holiday weekend, but at least your week's going to be short, right? And in this Labor Day, there's always the Labor Day sales, and everybody's going out and going crazy buying mods for their cars. And so one of the things that, or one of the topics I should say that I put out a while back, and one of the things that I talked about in that video was modifications, what works and what doesn't. And it's kind of funny. The video has been out now for a while. Didn't really get a whole lot of love on the good old interwebs. DSRT, what's up, brother? And it was funny because it was one of these deals where it's a situation where I'm being honest and saying what works and what doesn't. Hey, Speed Freaks in. Saying getting a Professor Mason balls while on your end. It is good to you, my man. Got the fist bump. I like it. And Team Mopar saying, what's up, B? What do you think of the R2C intake manifold air filter, or manifold air filter? Looks like he's talking about the cold air. Gore's checking in and said, hey, B. So I'm going to get to that in just a second, team. So here's the thing. In the video that I put together is basically the do's and don'ts, what works, what doesn't work, and I outlined some stuff, and I get it. Sometimes the delivery can be a bit dry, and with my videos, I understand that it's more an audio format than a visual format, so I get that, because I'm not bringing, pictures and all this other stuff and fading things in and out, this is just a long-form conversation that I'm having with you. But anyway, I can see where that can sometimes get a bit misconstrued, and it's easy for folks to sometimes take things the wrong way. You hear things differently, you're in a different frame of mind, what have you. So what I wanted to do for this chat was to bring the, bring the topic of modifications as far as what works and what doesn't to you guys. And as opposed to, just putting the video out there like I did, I got to thinking about it. In fact, I was working on a tuner revision for my car, and I thought, when I was talking about modifications and what worked and what didn't work, I mentioned the tuning, but I never really got way deep into it. Dr. Div saying turbos work. Yeah, forced induction does work. But speaking of forced induction, yeah, it works, but on what level? In other words, forced induction on a 392 car is going to yield a significantly different result than, say, forced induction on a Coyote. Things like that. But what works and what doesn't on the Mopars, and what have you bought that has worked? So the biggest question that I always get, and I kid you, multiple Mopars is in. What is up, brother? One of the first questions that always comes up, new Mopar owners are always asking, what cold air should I buy? Now, the thing is, and this kind of goes back to manufacturers making claims that parts make power where they typically don't. It's one of those things where when a manufacturer makes a claim and that claim is tested, there's always some caveat behind it. Well, the air temperature, or we're talking about a maximum peak gain that you could possibly represent. That's why you'll see that up to, and then whatever horsepower. I don't know what contraption that they used to get that up to power number, but things like cold air intakes never make any extra power. Now on a Hellcat, they make totally good sense because they add to the theater of the driving experience. I love the sound of a Hellcat with insert whoever's cold air intake. It does not matter in practical application. A stock airbox with a stock filter, not a K&N, because I can tell you that isn't going to do you any favors in a Hellcat or a 392 for that matter. But the basic net gain is nil, and it doesn't matter because the sound that you get is there. It adds to the driving experience. So, I never recommend or discount a cold air intake for a Hellcat because it does make it sound better. Now, for an NA application, 392 or 5.7, you go with the Hellcat airbox every time. It'll flow way more than that car can ever consume. It'll keep the air temps cooler for longer, and it's cheap. you get way more from that Hellcat system than you would from any aftermarket unit that I've seen out there. And by the way, I've tested these things. That's the other thing that maybe fell by the wayside when I put that video together. Yeah, I'm the guy that was testing them at the drag strip and on dynos. And, you know, without flaming any particular manufacturer, I think I did a pretty good job at, I don't know, dispelling some of the rumors that these parts actually worked in terms of picking up ET. It's difficult to argue with results, and my results would dictate, or at least indicate, I should say, that for NA applications, go with the Hellcat system. For Challenger, especially Charger, I get it, it's a little bit more difficult, but if you got a Challenger, go with the Hellcat system. If you've got a Hellcat, stick with what you got. Keep with the paper filter from Mopar. That mall filter is an incredibly high flowing filter. And oh yeah, if you want some theater, just grab one off the shelf. It does not matter which one you get. I know that there's some guys that'll you know, look at the box configuration and just everything under the sun. And up to, you know, of course, there's a power level where this is going to start to maybe fall in the aftermarket's lap. But I'm here to tell you that if you're making the 8 to 850 horsepower on a Mustang dyno that you need to start cresting the limits, and these are perceived limits, they're not even really guaranteed limits of what a stock airbox can manage, then you've got other issues other than just your cold air in terms of making power. Because at that point, if you're making 800 horsepower to the rear wheels, you're not going to know or notice the difference of 10 horsepower, if it's even going to give you that on the dyno. So again, you know, we run the cars on the street, not on a dyno, and it's real difficult when guys start asking about, well, you know, this part was said, you know, a friend of mine made 15 more horsepower with that part. Yeah, but did you take it to the drag strip? Did you run the car down the quarter mile or an eighth mile and see if you got any gains there? I mean, that's really where it matters. On the dyno is pointless, and all you're doing is shilling for the manufacturer that you shelled out your shekels for. So, you know, for me, it's just a frustrating topic, but it's always the first one that gets kicked around. And so anyway, let me find out who all is in real quick. Let's see. Bear with me just 1 second. Let's see. Introv RT saying, thoughts on boring and stroking a 5.7? Man, yeah. I mean, look, if you inherited a car and it's got a 5.7 and you want to throw some more power at it, sure. Bore it, stroke it, do a 392 setup on it. Cam, intake manifold, long tubes, the whole bit. The problem is if you actually spent money on that 5.7, the reason why I say that is because you're never going to get the money back from boring and stroking a 5.7. It just doesn't work like that. The power level is going to be basically comparable to a 392 anyway, and you'd almost be better off trading that car, taking the value of that car and trading it in on a car that has already got a bored and stroked 5.7, which is a 392. It's tried and true, and it's, you know, going to come already very well sorted. So thoughts on it? It's expensive. You know, you're always going to be paying the Mopar tax whenever you start getting into modifying any of these cars. So yeah, there's that. I mean, I hate to be the guy that says it that way, but realistically, that's how it plays out. If you're planning on taking a 5.7 much farther than, say, exhaust, maybe a gear, a tune, you know, ported intake manifold, you might want to start looking at a 392, unless you're talking about boost on that 5.7, and then I'd say, yeah, go for it. You know, the latest E-Force kits are nice, and you pair that E-Force with a little bit better cam, long tubes, pick your cat back in a gear, that thing's going to be a freaking riot. So again, things to consider when you've got a 5.7. I just don't know if I like the idea of digging too deep into the engine when it's kind of already been done for you by the original equipment manufacturer. Dr. Div saying my experience on the RT cars, either need a cold air that pulls from the bumper or just drop in a Hellcat filter. K&N makes good oil filters, not air filters. I would agree with that. Multiple Mopar saying 90% of the time factory filter flows very close to or outflows the cold air. All about grams per cylinder on power in the end. Absolutely. What he's talking about is just how many grams of air can that thing flow per cylinder stroke. And in this case, that MAL filter that comes in the Hellcats, just in terms of CFM flow, I think it flows 1100 CFM. Plenty to support quite a bit of power. You know, there's those that will tell you that it's 1 horsepower per CFM and all this other stuff. Basically, if you get to the point where you're actually causing a vacuum at the head of that filter, you're pulling a ton of air across that thing. So just know that coming into it. But absolutely right about that. Dr. Diff, I was talking to Introv, leave the stroke, take the RPM. Yeah, that works if you are running with a good set of heads. And also, you didn't mention on what 5.7 we're porting. If you're talking about an Apache, yeah, you can still get quite a bit of power out of those things, but the same rules apply because 5.7s are choked from the factory. Let's see. King's Eye saying, I was thinking about buying a Scat Pack and trading the engine for a Forge 426. Any thoughts? Yeah, you know, 426, in my opinion, and I'm going to get a lot of, you know, raised eyebrows for this, but in my experience, 426, you'd be better off sticking with a 392 stroke. Maybe go a little bit higher compression. The 426 is good, but there's not an intake manifold, except for, I think Holley might be coming out with one. Whoever's got the newest, latest, not BBK intake, would be the only reason why I would go with that 426 is to let the thing breathe better up top. Unless you've got an intake manifold that allows the 426 to breathe better up top, then basically you're trading a little bit of torque down low for about 25 horsepower up top. Not really all that great. I should say you're getting more torque down low, say 50 foot-pounds of torque down low, but you're only getting about 25, maybe 30 horsepower up top for the same combination on a 392. And even that is a bit of a stretch. So, you know, does it work? Do they work as far as strokers go? Yeah, but we're living in an era now where the benefits, you know, the juice just quite isn't worth the squeeze. That's kind of where we're at now. We're on the other side of that line of demarcation. Not necessarily a bad thing. You know, in some cases, believe it or not, getting like an Arrington off-the-shelf 426, just because it's available, that bottom end is really not going to be any different in terms of cost than a 392. So I say go for it. Just know that you're not going to be spooling the thing up to, you know, 6,400 RPM, 6,500 RPM with that intake manifold. Be doing good to spool it to about 61, 62. Car's going to run great. Just we just don't have enough supporting parts to make that 426 work to its potential. Introp saying, I'm thinking because my crank is rusted and the stroker crank is about the same as a new one, so why not? In that case, well, you got to get pistons and rods. So, but yeah, I mean, if it's in the budget, go for it. Multi saying, as far as stock car goes, in my opinion, very basic engine tune and trans to net the best power A and ET result. Very accurate statement there. Also, a car can make the same power at peak, but if it makes more power at 3,000 RPM, still nets ET. And that's a big part of it too, guys. That's one of the issues, especially when you're dealing with a car that's this heavy. Peak horsepower numbers are irrelevant when you're talking about trying to get a barge like one of these things moving. You know, it's interesting. With aftermarket camshafts for these cars, everybody asks how much horsepower does it pick up, but nobody looks at the graph as a whole. And from my experience, when guys have gone and gotten a little bit too aggressive with the camshafts in these things, and it's real easy to do with some off-the-shelf cams, you notice that the car actually runs about the same ET, a little bit better mile an hour, but you just don't get the huge gain unless you've got a very very spot on transmission tune to go along with that cam. And in that case, you can definitely net some results. But yeah, the big issue is the loss of torque down low. You need torque to get the thing moving. And again, if you can't put something together that gives you a net total average gain in power, then the car is not going to be really much faster. And let me just also say this. Unless you're building a drag race only car, you're driving this thing around on the street, you want that snappy torque response, that snappy throttle response. You want it to feel the way that it felt down low as a stock car, and you won't. The car is going to be a bit numb. And again, we're talking about camshafts now, you know, what works and what doesn't. Do camshafts make power? Damn right they make power. I've got a couple of grinds that are known strong performing camshafts. One of them is a camshaft that is for NA applications. The other one is one that works well for strokers, both NA and boosted. But the thing is that there's still, and it takes a very solid tune to make a camshaft work, but there's still going to be a bit of a trade-off if you go with something that is off the shelf. Custom grind? Absolutely, because I can control the lobes. I can tell you exactly what springs you need to get. None of this NSR stuff. Go with something that actually works and you would net gains across the board. But I don't know, is it worth the money? That's the bigger question, right? Because this is really the turning point of the conversation. Results are one thing, but it's results for the dollar that you're spending, especially when you start to compare it to, I don't know, an LS. I mean, I know it's an unfair comparison, but for crying out loud, I mean, it exists. And besides, you don't see everybody Hemi swapping the world. You see them LS swapping the world, and for good reason. They net great results and they're cheap. So, you know, after you get past the Hemi tax and, of course, the extra labor that goes along with putting cams or, you know, whatever else you're going to do with one of these cars, the platform itself isn't all that easy to work with. These are the types of things that you have to ask yourself, that is it worth it? You know, regardless of the power output, cams, headers, forced induction, everything else. I guess the point of that whole video that I put together was, is it worth it to do the work to the car, and in what situations does it make sense to modify the car, or in what situations does it make better sense to get a Hellcat over a 392 or a 392 over a 5.7? Where does that line get drawn? Well, your own personal finances would dictate that, but as the cost of these cars is coming down, the viability of the modifications, well, that's coming up because, you know, you didn't spend as much on the car, you got a little bit extra in the kitty for modifications. My main goal is just to let you know what you're in for and what to expect and what challenges you're going to have when you're talking about modifying a Mopar versus modifying like an LS. Big difference, and you need to know these differences before you start shelling out your money. Let's see. Intro saying I also just got the engines. Alrighty. Dimboy saying, yo, what's up? What's up, man? Crypto's in the house. Vote with Mopars. 412 is what I've chosen on the Hellcat build for better RPM characteristics. And in that case, it's going to work really well. What a lot of guys don't understand, too, is going stroker and then going with a supercharger or boost on top of that. You've got to remember that the larger the engine, the more speed, impeller speed you're going to need for whatever supercharger you've got to feed that engine at the same amount of boost, and it's easy to get outside of that efficiency range. You know, it's interesting too, you know, this, when it comes to boost, this is a situation where bigger is not always better. A lot of times going with what I like, which is a higher compression, larger displacement with lower boost, that's kind of my happy zone when it comes to builds, because you've got lower boost, which means more efficient supercharger, cooler downstream temps, which means you can run more timing, and you're not going to be as fuel sensitive with that type of a combination if it's tuned properly. The big upside to that is that you get better off-boost performance out of that combination. Think Coyotes in that respect. The 392 would fit into that mold if there's an intake manifold that would allow the thing to actually breathe on the big end. It doesn't matter how much boost or how much air you're cramming into that intake. If the runners are only that big around, you're just not going to get enough air through those cylinders. And the runners are about that long too. Yeah, I mean, the main thing is you've got to pick a target. You've got to find out what you're going to build and then budget yourself around the target goals of the vehicle. If it's a street car, you want something that's snappy all the time. If it's a drag race application, you want something that screams on the big end. Two completely different schools of thought. You just need to make sure that when you come into this conversation of modifying your vehicle, that you have a goal in mind. Is your goal to run, say, a 10-second time? Do you want to have a 10-second time slip? Then that's a fairly easy goal to achieve. If you're wanting to run 9s or get that thing into the 8s, well, you better make sure that you've got not only the budget, but the patience and the bankroll to back this thing up if something does go wrong, because you've got to remember, it's not all about cubic inches, it's about cubic dollars once you start making the big power. And you've got to have a war chest to keep that battle running, and just know that going into the fray as well. So often the case is, guys will talk about modifications as though they're talking about a video game. Like you make this modification to a car and it just runs like it's magic. It doesn't work like that. There's a ton of work and a ton of math and a ton of headaches that go into making any of these combinations work properly. Oddly enough, it's that work that you're paying for. It's the results that you're paying for, right? That's what you want to achieve, which whatever goal you've put together, you've got to be able to fund that project. And you've got to be able to fund it long term. You're going to start finding the weak link in your chain pretty quickly once you start getting around 800-900 horsepower to the rear wheels on one of these cars. But you can find it even sooner if you're talking about a 392. You're talking about a transmission that could give up the ghost. You're talking about well, we'll get away from the pistons thing because that's been beaten to death. But the reality is, unless you're willing to take the extra steps to ensure durability and you want to try to build a fast car on the cheap, you've got to know, I'm here to tell you, man, I hate to be the guy to tell you this, you've got to know that you are on borrowed time. No matter who is doing the build, there's only so much that the metal itself can manage before it breaks. Let's see, Dr. Diff is saying, I'll be testing that Holley Super Sniper soon, although if it never suggested on an NA application, the low end will suck, but I have a 3600 converter. Very nice. But yeah, see, that's the other thing is drivability. He brings up a good point too. Drivability is the funniest argument, if you want to put it that way, because it's the subjective topic. There's guys that'll drive cars on the street that would drive me absolutely nuts. I would hate it. But I've also driven cars on the street that would drive other people nuts. So it just depends on how rowdy, what level of rowdy, I should say, can you get away with your car, and what can you live with long term? Because let me break something to you guys, man. Look, something that's cool in the short term can become incredibly annoying in the long term. Something real radical, racy sounding cams, just louder than hell all the time. Look, man, I love it just as much as the next guy, but you got to drive that thing for more than 30 minutes. You get out of the thing and your freaking head's ringing like a gong. Yeah, you're not going to be so into it anymore at that point. The other funny thing too, just as an aside, a lot of guys equate loud to power. Couldn't be any further from the truth. Some of the nastiest cars I've ever run against were very quiet. So anyway, just saying. Then Boy's asking, do you think the new Viper will have a supercharger or naturally aspirated 6.2? It'll probably come with one of each. I'd like to see it come with a 426 actually. That all aluminum 426 with a high compression set of heads and a short runner intake would be right at my alley. Let's see, King's Eye saying, okay, so a 4392 and add power adder would be better than a 426? Yes, it would be, absolutely. Donald Powers checking in saying, hello, Mr. Mason. I picked up a 5.7 long block, poor rebuild, but it has new pistons. My build for a 94 Dakota, regular cab, short bed. Oh, he's asking for advice on a cam for street and strip play. You would be looking for something somewhere in the street and strip on a 5.7, intake center line of about 108.5 to 109, intake duration at 50, somewhere around 218-ish, lift of about 560. That would be your intake side, lobe separation angle of about 115, and I would run about 222 to 226 degrees exhaust duration on that thing. Something like that would be good for you. It'd be a good overall, just a fun cam. It'd sound good too. Dr. Just asking, did you see the new comp stage cams for the modern Hemi? They picked up impressive gains on a bone stock 5.7 on an engine dyno. No, I haven't seen that yet. I'll have to go check that out. Introff saying, I got one that I'm going to leave displacement alone with large cam, and I plan to stroke one to 420 for the memes and see what happens to the torque curve if I use Hellcat cam and Eagle block. That'll be a fun build. Patrick is asking, will any of these aftermarket cams pass California smog? Nope. How high lift and duration can one go before it fails? Does anyone know? Well, here's the thing. I mean, in the tune, technically, if you're running stock catalytic converters and you're not throwing any check engine lights, technically, I guess by that measure, it'll pass. But if you have anybody asking for a cam, what is it, a carb compliance card, I doubt you're going to get one out of any of these aftermarket camshafts. Very, very, very doubtful. Introp saying Eagle heads on the 5.7. Eagle heads are all right. They're a little bit more fun to play with than the Apache because the Eagles just don't flow as much, but you get away with more overlap with those camshafts. Or with those cylinder heads. Gordon's checking in saying, my buddy's 392 with cam headers and 3-inch exhaust tuned on 94, just on it at 499 wheel, 455 torque. It's an awesome build. Crazy what these NA Hemis can do. Yeah, it is. And like I say, I mean, you've got to, and let me get to dynos real quick but before I do. It's fun to see what you can get out of them. Again, it just depends on your bankroll that you're working with. But they can be a lot of fun, and just know what you're getting coming into it. I know that with one of my cams, at 392, ported intake, ported throttle body, long tubes, no cats, made, I think it was 507, I think is what it made on a dyno comp. And that car is known to pretty much house some cars that it shouldn't. So, in fact, that combination's running around quite a bit. So, and doing quite a bit of damage. It can absolutely be done. It's just, with the amount of money, time, effort that you put into that car, cost of Hellcats is coming down. So, it might be something to consider. But I do love the NA builds. And I think the NA will be a lot of fun. I think it'll be a lot of fun once the cars get to a point where it makes sense to where you can buy them fairly inexpensively on the used market. The only thing is that these cars don't come inexpensively. Take a look at the cost of any, 2015, 2016 Scat Pack, and it'll probably be surprising what they're selling for. Costin, unpronounceable. What do you think about large displacement Hemi strokers, 440, 454 high compression NA builds? I think they're cool if you can get a sheet metal intake for them. Rod to stroke ratio on those things is going to be a bit much. I don't know if I would run one long term on the street, but as a hot rod, they'd be quite a bit of fun. Again, you're going to be limited in terms of RPM by your intake manifold, which means you're going to have a big rush of torque, but, really no big pull on the horsepower end. So, You know, it's kind of the same with like the big stroker LSs. Unless you've got that thing set up for just an obnoxious amount of RPM, they don't last too long, and they make some great power numbers. But you know, and the same kind of stuff is going to apply with these engines. The more you try to, you know, lean on one of these things in terms of bore stroke and RPM, the tougher it's going to be. And it's mainly because of the rod stroke ratio. Molten Mopar saying anything under a 950 and you'll break from time to time. It's just life. Absolutely, it is, man. And y'all need to go. Y'all need to go check out his channel, by the way. Like now, subscribe if you haven't already. Huge supporter of my channel. Good friend of mine, and definitely worth your time to check his stuff out. He's saying fast, cheap, and reliable. Pick any two. Absolutely. That's another thing. Unrealistic expectations of the shop that you're working with. If the shop is good, they're going to be behind. And if they're behind, it means that it is a it should anyway, mean that it's a reputable shop. If people trust them to do their cars, you're getting a lot of guys that are, you know, they're being recommended to that shop. There's a reason for that, and they're few and far between. But when it comes to Mopars, you've got to be working with a shop that speaks Mopar. You know, a shop like Pike's Performance, Dr. Diff Shop. These are shops that you've got to support and stay on top of and keep these guys rolling, because very few shops are good enough to actually speak Mopar. They may speak LS or Coyote, but when it comes to tuning and building these things, you've got to know that you're dealing with a slightly different animal, and it's in the details where you can definitely go wrong with one of these Mopars. So it makes perfectly good sense to go the extra mile and make sure that you are working with a shop that does, on some level, specialize in Mopars. Racer X checking in, saying, "What is happening, brother? I think I lost my wrench." Oh, wait, we got to fix that. I don't know how we fix that. Dang it. I did this once before. Oh, well. I'll figure it out later. But Racer X saying, "Hope you're loving those 309s. Got the fist bump." Absolutely. The 309 and multiple Mopars drive shaft have done a smokingly good job with this car, taking care of all the problems that I had and then some. You know, I'll tell you something, the car now, I mean, it's so smooth, it literally feels like you're not moving when you're going well into triple digit speeds. And, you know, that's what means everything to me, was just, you know, getting that smoothness back and really getting some of the enjoyment of driving my car back. Because, you know, I'll be honest with you, you know, driving this thing around, you know, when the speed limit's 75 and you've got a vibration that's just starting to come in right at that number, that's not any good, you know. But now she is buttery smooth and the gears are awesome. So far, she's run a best of 1054 at 131.5 in the heat. Last weekend, it ran a 10.6 flat. The traps were jacked up, so the mile an hour really doesn't matter. But per the data log, it had been around 130, 131. So yeah, absolutely loving the gears. Making some minor changes to the tune, only for, you know, drivability, a little bit of torque management changes, but for the most part, well, timing wise, it's still stock, and I'm throwing a little bit of fuel at it just like before, but no major changes to the tune, and she is loving it, let me tell you. Let's see, King's Eye saying, "I really want to buy a 300S and put that Force 392 in it and make my own SRT." A lot of guys have done that, and they are loving that combination. Let's see, Crypto's saying, mild build, 105 throttle body, ported snout, 285 pulley injectors. Can you recommend a good airbox setup to flow the extra air volume? Yeah, stock. I can't really recommend anybody else's setup. And again, it's just because Racer X, prime example of this, runs a stock airbox in his Charger, full weight Charger, making 1,000 horsepower at the crank, and you know, mid 9-second car. I mean, an air intake is not going to make that car a low 9-second car. I mean, it's just not going to make a difference. And the only time that it really does start to make a difference is if you run like a mesh, like if you bullnose the intake, run mesh on the end of it. But I would never, ever recommend something like that for the street. That is a racetrack only thing. So again, you know, Racer X can daily drive his car. He can drive his car from Dallas to Maine to LA to, you know, Brownsville. Never have a worry, never have a care in the world because he's got original equipment, manufactured parts in the thing. And then if he decides to, you know, pull over at, you know, some nearest drag strip and rip off some deep 9-second pass, he can. And he's running stock parts. And so again, you know, when it comes to recommendations, I'm not any good for that because I haven't seen him make any difference at the drag strip. That being said, if I were to buy one, which one would I get? I don't want to speak out of turn here. I don't know, throw a leg maker on it. They look good. They sound great. I mean, any open element filter is going to do well. So in terms of just having a sound, but in terms of flowing the extra volume of air, that stock filter will get you right where you need to be. And the stock air box is the best performing air box that's out there. You know, the AFE Momentum might be a close second. It's very similar in style to the stock air box, but if it's similar in style to the stock air box and you're not netting any permanent gains, it makes it difficult for me to say that it's better. Not to mention, I think that one's a pain in the ass to swap filters out on. So there's that. Oh, and then there's the question of dry filter versus oil filter. Man, you got to go with the oil filter because dry filters flow horribly. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Racer X got the fist bump, Mopars. Let's see. Blackbird saying, what up, B Mason? I live in, was it Michigan? And I'm starting to see more and more C8s in test form around here. I want to hear your opinion on the C8 and it having a VCT trans like the GT500. The C8, it makes sense to have a DTC because it's got a lower, much lower torque producing engine. And it's a much lighter car. So in that application, the DTC works great. I'm worried about it working with the Mustang, number one, because it weighs over 4,200 pounds and it makes a lot of torque to boot. You add a sticky tire to that equation and you might be looking at, well, I can tell you this, clutches are going to be something you're going to have to budget for probably, if not once every year and a half, maybe as often as every 2 years. And if you take the thing to the drag strip, brother, all bets are off, man. Patrick's asking, Elephant in a future production Challenger Charger, or will pressure to go more electric kill that? I don't think you have to worry about FCA succumbing to any pressure about electricity or anything like that. No, I think they're too busy having fun, and I would say that a Elephant derivative would be something that, or something derived from that Hellcat platform, so to speak, engine or supercharger or combination thereof, would be something that you would see before any hybrid combination for any of the muscle car style cars that they're making. Let's see. Dr. Div saying, we did the testing on our own vehicles and paid great money for training. Thanks for the shout out. Where's my damn wrench? That's awesome. We got you a shirt. Let's see. Symphonics, do you think GM's plan to sell the cheapest V8 car with the LT1 33 grand compared to the GT and Mopars will help their sales, or is it too late? Man, look, they couldn't sell that car. You talk about the Camaro. They couldn't sell the Camaro to save themselves, and then they basically cut off their nose to spite their face with the remodel of that car. Like I've said before, man, the Camaro is just in a bad spot. It's between a rock and a hard place, and you know, I've always made that, you know, for the Camaro to outsell in a pyramid, it has to come up, not down. And right now the Camaro is down. You don't get the muscle car driving experience you get with a 392, and you don't get the outright high winding performance feel that you get with the Mustang. It's a compromise. And in this business, compromise is not a look up. You're looking down at it from some point of view. means it's failing on both ends. The only way they can save the Camaro, in my opinion, is a pretty significant redesign. Give the thing some power, throw some gear ratio at it, and make it more muscle car than the Challenger to drive, and make it walk every Mustang the way that it sits in bone stock form. If you don't do that, and then the Camaro just doesn't really have a leg to stand on, quite honestly. Although there is an ass for every seat, that audience is dwindling very quickly. Let's see. Them boys running saying, do you think that a big block is better or a 392 for a 392 or C7 Grand Sport, or is it better to stick with a small block? Let me read that again. Do I think that a big block is better for a 392 or C7 Grand Sport? Is it better to stick with a small block? Well, I'm not really sure what the question is there. The 392 by rights is a board and stroke small block. The C7 Grand Sport is a 6.2. So you're better off sticking with the LS or the Gen 3 Hemi in that respect. It just depends on what you're building. I mean, if you're doing like a swap, if that's the question, like a 6.2 out of a Grand Sport or a 392, 392 gives you more options. And if you're doing a resto mod swap and you're hacking up the floors anyway, or you're going to be replacing the floors anyway, whatever the case, take the extra month to make the modern stuff work. Big blocks are fine. They're nice to chat over, but they're dinosaurs at this stage of the game. The modern stuff is just so much better, lighter, more power, modern transmissions, the whole bit. It's just better all the way around. That being said, I still like the old school stuff, and anything with a carburetor will get my attention pretty quickly. He will say, what up? B saying, what do you think about a Force 392 with boost? How much power could it handle? Depends on what you're building, but it'll handle as much power as you can throw at it. I've seen them make well over 800 horsepower to the rear wheels. But you also have to consider the transmission in this case. See, it's not just the engine, it's everything that engine is bolted to. So you've got the transmission, which is a big part. Are you going to be running this thing on a drag strip, or are you just not playing around with it on the street? The drive shaft becomes a questionable part in this whole equation as well. So in terms of power, forged internals, throw a D1X on that thing, pulley it to the sky, injector it, sheet metal intake, and I mean, let that thing scream. So you're going to be just fine in terms of power output, but it's because you've got everything else downstream of that thing that is probably going to not be okay. You might want to consider going possibly a different route, unless you've already started going down that route. Dr. Div said, popping on the end of the airbox keeps out the bugs. Bugs, car needs protein, man. And he said, then again, yeah, we are running into love bug season down here. Anybody that's ever been through the South, during the fall, we got these little bugs that are always flying around. They're paired up, flying around, and there's swarms of them, and the whole front of your car will be covered in dead love bugs. Dim Boy's asking, he's basically asking, is a big block better or a small block better? So, again, it depends on what you're building. If outright power, torque, tip-in torque, driving experience is really what you're looking for, then you cannot argue with a big block, man. I'm telling you, 454, 427 on the Chevy side, a properly built 440, not a stock one, but a properly built 440, properly built 460. Very difficult to argue just the tip-in torque on one of those things. Small blocks are great for being an overall well-balanced platform, though, in terms of being able to turn RPM, make horsepower, things like that. All things considered, you can make the same horsepower with a small block, you'll just never make the same torque. And the small block is obviously going to take more RPM to make that kind of power. Depends on what you're into. I typically like really high-strung small blocks. I don't know, there's something that just appeals to me when you're spooling one of those things up. You know, you can gear them a little bit more to the sky, and if for no other reason, I like small blocks because they're easier to work on and easier to install and easier to repair than a big block, unless we're talking about something where we're just, you know, taking, you know, blowing the whole front part of the vehicle apart and yanking something out that way. In that case, it really doesn't matter. But in terms of fitment, overall, just, you know, how, you know, the total overall feel, if I'm building my own car, I go boosted small block and call it a day. You will be saying, I have a DSS drive shaft and axles and an M6 with a McLeod. McLeod's a very good clutch. Love McLeod clutches. Hopefully that DSS drive shaft is working out for you. You will be saying thank you. Well, thank you, brother. Patrick's saying, okay, another one. Why did the small block win out in modern Mopars? The small block went out in modern Mopars because of fuel economy. And not to mention, you know, you got to remember that after, I mean, quite honestly, after 1971, everybody's big blocks took a dive. There's just no way to feed that large of an engine going down the highway and get good fuel economy unless you kill the gearing on that thing. And if you kill gearing on it, then you basically kill the effective torque production of that engine. So in terms of efficiency, they're just not as efficient. And you know, with modern technology, though, you can certainly make them very efficient, but they still aren't going to be as efficient as their smaller counterparts. And to be honest with you, with modern technology, you can just get so much usable power out of a small block that, I mean, you can break a transmission with a small block just as easy as you can a big block. So, but instead of going with cubic inches, like with the Hellcat, for example, Hellcat is a perfect analogy, or is very analogous to a big block muscle car, the way that it makes power. So the big block made it back just in a different way. You know, the Terminator Cobra and before that, the Lightning really brought that big block feel back to us. And it's been that supercharged small block formula that's been, you know, giving us that same feel more reliably, better fuel economy, and an easier package to work with, and also cooling as well. The small blocks are just easier to cool. So for a number of different reasons, it just made sense to go with the small block. Let's see, Sean E., do 309 gears need to be broken in? Yes, they do. What I'll tell guys is, you know, just drive the thing normally. You know, you have guys telling you to do figure eights and all this other stuff. Yeah, do that too. It's kind of an old bit of a wives' tale, but do it anyway if it makes you feel good. You know, the whole 7 figure eights will help to get the clutches a little bit broken in. I don't know where some of these old things come from. Just drive the car normally for about, I don't know, give it a couple 100 miles just to let everything soak up the goodness, and then get out there and rip it. You'll be good. Let's see, Patrick's asking, especially when 440s and 426s used to dominate, are they more advanced? Yeah, well, small block, not yes and no. I mean, you got to remember that, you know, what makes a big block useful? Well, technically speaking, big blocks are useful, and the only time they're really, and this is where Chevrolet did such a great job with the Mark III, which would basically be the 396, 402, 454, 427. Where that engine did really well is it had varying uses across multiple footprints. So you have industrial applications where the thing can be used as a starter motor for large jet engines. The FAC 426 Hemis were used like that. In fact, even Gen 1 Hemi engines were used as starter motors. But you've got marine applications. You've got large trucks, which can be dump trucks, school buses, anything that's, you know, over a ton, like, you know, 2 ton, 2.5 ton, 3 ton trucks that are going to be run on gas. You've got bus applications and motorhomes and all this other crap that big blocks can do very well. And oh yeah, they work well in a car. That's really the only time the big block makes sense to keep making, right? But the thing is that as technology advanced, so did diesel technology. And as diesel technology advanced, you could get the same amount of torque and pulling power out of a smaller engine, significantly smaller just in terms of dimensions, than that big block. And so better fuel economy, the same ability to drag large weight and loads and wind resistance up a hill, that it only makes sense to go that route. So the big block, it still does have its place. If you want something that's going to make a lot of power and you want to make a lot of power on the cheap, and you've got a platform that you can physically put that big engine into, then yeah, go with the big block. But the problem is, going with a 440 is tough because it's tough to make big power with a 440. 650 horsepower, it's not hard to get, but it's not economically feasible when you could go with, if we're talking about spending the money here, you could build a really pissed off small block that'll pretty much yield you roughly the same results, but for significantly less, and it's gonna be a lot easier to work with. So I don't know. I'm hoping that's answering the question. It's just that they outlived their usefulness. There's other technologies that are out there that makes the big block from an economic sense, a bit of a dinosaur. But there's no arguing that on a drag strip, or if you're building like a sand dragster or something like that, something that's going to need just a lot of power all the time. You build a twin turbo 600 cubic inch big block, make about 2,500 horsepower, but it'll do it all day forever. That's kind of the look that you're going for. It's just that you got to cool it. And again, cooling something that big is tough to do. So, you've got not only have to fit the engine in the thing, but you've got to fit all the cooling capacity into that same platform. It's another reason. Take a look at a small block, throw a little bit more gear ratio at the small block, call it a day. Let's see, Shawnee is asking, if I put a 180 thermostat in, but it looks like the fans don't come on until around 210 or more, what is the stock temperature they typically come on? They start coming on at 202. Ah, man, I just got through doing more fan mods with mine. You have a pulse width modulated target temperature of 212. I think they start coming on at 212, 216, and 220, I think is how they tier up. Let's see. Oh, Patrick's saying you answered. Oh, good deal. Shawnee is saying, good evening, Brian. Did you have a good long weekend? Yes, I did. Was able to play around with the car, and am playing around with a little bit of tune stuff. Just basically wrapping up the tune on my car, my stock timing tune, so to speak. That's going to be about a wrap on this thing here pretty soon. I am working on a tune for the car, but hoping to start, we'll see. I'm not going to let any cats out of the bag, but maybe taking a little bit different direction on a different project, but we'll see here soon enough. Might have a couple coming up, as a matter of fact. We will see. I'm saying, just got a 180 thermostat and an electric fan. Where should I set it to kick on and off? Let's see. You're going to want it to kick on at about 187 degrees. Well, you're going to want it to kick on. It depends on how it's pulse width modulated. Low speed at about 187, medium at 192, and high speed at 194 or 196 is how I set mine up, with a pulse width modulation temperature of 190 degrees. That's how I like to set mine up. Any lower than that, and the fans are just on all the time. If you find that the fans are on, like if you find that your temperature driving down the road is like 187, 190, then kick your fans up to like 192, 194, and then kind of tear them up from there. You just don't want the fans running while it's driving down the highway. Then boys running saying, oh, okay, I'm trying to build the fastest, most powerful naturally aspirated engine I can. That's why I was asking about the big block and small block. if you want the most power you can make in obviously a big block is the way to go. Just remember that, you know, parts are more expensive, parts are going to be heavier. You need to make sure that you've got a transmission that can manage the torque that thing is going to make. As long as everything downstream is fit for play, then you'll be good to go building a big block. And I will say this, I've owned a couple of cars with big blocks, and I can tell you that you do miss the experience of a big block. I mean, a big block that redlines at, say, 5,800 RPM, it feels like it's making peak torque all the time. I mean, your port velocity is just so high all the time with a configuration like that. You got to remember that you're talking about a 440 earlier. Piece of trivia for you. The port velocity on a 440, the 375 horse configuration, which wasn't 375, it was less. But anyway, port velocity on the 440 at 4,700 RPM was the same as the 426 Hemi at 6,200 RPM. If that gives you any indication as far as the efficiency range of that engine and where it would start making power and where it would sign off, same port velocity at 4,700 RPM versus 6,200 RPM for the Hemi. Now, the Hemi would be flowing significantly more air up there. But again, it's how does the car feel when you're not wide open? And again, if you're building something for the street, you've got to remember that it's not going to be wide open all the time. If you want something that is fun and like on a tip-in tire fryer, is what we used to love back in the day. I mean, you'd see these guys build, you know, big blocks that would maybe red line at 6,000 RPM, but damn, I mean, you roll into the throttle at about 4,000 RPM in third gear and you just start doing this rolling burnout on street tires. That's when a big block is fun. Big blocks that spin high RPM, yeah, they're cool and all, but again, you can get the same results with a small block and they're just easier to cool, easier to install, easier to work on. I don't know. I could go either way, really. Dr. is saying, boosted small block and call it a day. Best comment all day. Gotta love some boost. Absolutely. Well, you know, it's all about how much air can that thing ingest and how much fuel can it consume, man. Boost is nice. It's not always the best solution, but it's rare when it's not. Let's see. Symphonic saying, what has been some of the best races you have seen at the Strip this year in relatively stock cars? Hellcat versus Hellcat's always really good, especially when you got a couple of guys that can cut OXX lights. So I've had quite a few good races this year with my car. Other really good races that I've seen have been Scat Packs versus Mustangs. That's turned out to be a pretty close race. Scat Packs on drag packs versus Coyotes on drag packs NA. Been some real good racing there. I watched Scat Pack get out, what was it, like, it's been maybe a couple of months ago. Was out basically just having a field day up against some Mustangs. Now, he didn't win every race, but he was, you know, doing pretty good, running low 12s. Mustangs were also running low 12s, but, you know, these are cars that are tuned on gasoline, not, you know, full effort E85 builds or anything like that, just more realistic tuned Mustangs versus that tuned Scat Pack, and it was pretty good racing there. You know, just as far as what I've been paying attention to, those are some of the best races that I've seen. And of course, you know, nothing is as much fun as, you know, the supercharged LS Vet versus Hellcat. That's just like Heads Cam LS versus 392 cars. You know, typically that Vet will just eke me out, but barely. Yeah, that's been a pretty good combination to see run at the drag strip, and I was able to get a kill on one of those this past weekend, by the way. So yeah, definitely good racing. Deucey's asking, how do you feel about a 125 shot of nitrous on a 5.7 Hemi? I say if you got the right setup, it'll work, but get a progressive kit. Nitrous Works will steer you in the right direction there. Do your due diligence on that and you'll be fine. I'd say a 100 shot be a little bit more my flavor, but you know, sure. But here's the thing: run a progressive shot. Make sure you go a shade colder on the plugs. Get a nitrous tune for the car, and run a little bit of butane in the thing just to be on the safe side. Make sure that if you're running nitrous that you know the proper care and feeding of your nitrous kit too. There's nothing more annoying than, I don't know, having a broken solenoid be the reason why you blow your engine up. Make sure that you purge the system when you're done with it. Disconnect the bottle after you've done so. These little tips and tricks will save you a ton of headache and a ton of heartache if your nitrous solenoid doesn't fire, and or it fires when you don't want it to, your solenoid fails, whatever the case is, and you wind up in a situation where you've blown your car up. So as long as you know how to manage your nitrous kit, you will be fine. But you gotta do everything else leading up to that, and don't get too aggressive with it either, because the transmission can only handle so much. Dim Boy saying, thank you for all the advice, man. You're always coming through, man. I appreciate you hanging out with me, man. Happy to. Patrick's saying, happy to have an old Mopar 73 Roadrunner factory 4-speed 7440 engine. Obviously, autos are faster nowadays, but in my day, it was all about the 4-speed. Yeah, I'll tell you what, they are harder and harder to come by for nice examples. You can find them out there, but yeah, nice examples are getting tough to find. So yeah, and I had a freaking 69 Roadrunner sold out. Well, I'm not going to say sold out from underneath me. Just anyway, I did a video on that. I'll start crying if I start thinking about that. Patrick's asking, but I presume no one races the modern 6-speed. A lot of guys do, or at least did. You know, with the modern 6-speeds, you know, they're nice, but in one of the Mopars, it's tough because the cars are heavy. The 392 has more drag race friendly gear ratios than the Hellcat does, so at least there's that to consider as being one of the reasons why a lot of guys just don't mess with the manuals anymore. But yeah, you know, the modern automatics are just that good. And you know, I hate to say it, but the manual transmission, especially in terms of drag racing, is starting to turn more into a novelty than anything else. Now, you know, if I were building an old school car, it'd be tough for me to move away from a 4-speed, but even then, I don't know, man. A built 727 with a set of 430 gears sounds pretty much spot on for me for a little drag racing. But again, in that application, you just can't really take it on the highway. So it just depends on what you're going to do with it. But yeah, by any standard, today's automatics are so far and away superior to a manual that it's, I mean, I hate to say it, man, but the comparison's just not even fair. You know, buy the manual for the nostalgia, buy the manual for the feel of just going through gears. But even then, the feel isn't quite like what it used to be. I mean, even with my Vipers, I mean, it was cool because, you know, MGW shifter, you always had that, you know, you always called that bolt action feel, that bolt action rifle feel, or that lever action rifle feel with that shifter. You just never really get that with the modern shifters either. So it's hard to make a case for the manual, just because the feel of them is kind of dwindled a little bit, and because the performance is just so not there when compared to the modern automatic, it kind of takes it out of the running. King's Eye saying, I can listen to you talk about cars all day. Man, I appreciate that. Because I could definitely do it all day, that's for sure. SRT Cat saying, what's up, bro? Have you pinned your crank? No, I haven't. Can you talk a little bit about that? I heard stock Hellcat crank bolts are coming loose and damaging engines. Can engines get damaged if the bolt comes loose? They can. And what happens is the like if my fist is the crank, the pulley is actually pressed onto the crank, and then there's a bolt that goes in on the end of it. On these cars, that bolt is torqued to 239 foot-pounds of torque. Now, that's a lot of torque. The problem with the balancer itself spinning on the crank, that typically happens with cars with aftermarket pulleys, not the non-clutch type of aftermarket pulley. Stock cars, you don't see that very often. You just don't see it a lot at all. And it doesn't really have anything to do, I don't think anyway, that it has anything to do with the bolt itself. I think it has more to do with just how that balancer is pressed onto the crank. I have thought about pinning my crank though. I am a little bit on the fence, however, and but I may end up doing it. And the reason why is I don't plan on running more boost with my car. And the problem is once you pin your crank, you're kind of married to that pin position, right? Because you take that balancer off and try to put another balancer on. Now you've got this little half moon cut in your snout. So I'm a little bit on the fence with that, but as a safety precaution, I may end up pinning the crank. So we'll see about that, but I don't know, man. If I'm going to go through all of that, I might as well put like a Innovators West balancer on it and get maybe a little bit more boost out of the thing, but I don't know. I'm real happy with the way the car runs now, and I think pinning this stock balancer wouldn't be that big of a deal. So, but that's really the reasoning behind it. And I haven't seen a lot of cars fail. I mean, there's some that can, but I just never did run into too many of them. Let's see. Oh, Symphonics asking, fuel system treatment cleaners do anything or worthless? Yes, and well, yeah. The answer to that's kind of yes on two different fronts, but are they worth it? Yeah, I mean, Seafoam is known to do pretty good at cleaning injectors, or at least helping to keep things slightly clean, but I don't know that if it actually works that well long term. I don't like adding anything to fuel in a combination like a Hellcat. You can get away with it on an NA car, I guess, but you'd have to kind of take it easy for a couple of tanks of fuel afterwards, just because it's not adding anything in terms of octane to the car. So they're proven to kind of work, but not really. And there's already a lot of detergents in gasoline anyway. So my thoughts on that are use them sparingly and just know that you're working with something that the engine was not designed to run on to begin with. I mean, the car was not designed to run on Seafoam. It's designed to run on gasoline the way that you get it out of the pump. And again, it's already got a lot of detergents working for it already. Shawnee's saying, weird to see your car in street trim. Did you get it all cleaned up? Try a new finish. My favorite, strong wax. Actually, it is a little bit cleaned up. She was looking a little bit rough after the last track outing. They're doing a lot of road construction out here, and so there's some parts of the highway that have just got some funk on it. So getting the mainly just got the funk off the car, and also too just wanted to drive the thing around. I've been basically just driving it to the drag strip and back, and with this new drive shaft that multiple Mopars hooked us up with, it's one of those things where the car is actually just nice to drive again. So I'm finding myself trying to find an excuse to just take the thing out and have some fun with it. So that's mainly the reason why it's in street trim, although we will be going back to the drag strip this weekend for the last of the shakedown passes with the tunes and everything else, and then start getting ready for lower DAs. I got another set of tires coming. Hopefully it'll be in by Friday. If it is, then we will be at the drag strip. And we're going to get out there and have a little bit of fun with it and keep crushing the dreams of those lesser Chevrolets and Fords that want to try and run up on this thing. Let's see. SRT Cat, would you recommend a 10% lower pulley on a 91 octane and what I need a tune? No, I wouldn't recommend it. And if you did it, you would certainly need a tune. Here's the thing, 91 octane with a 10% lower, let me just put it to you like this. It's going to depend on the altitude that you live. If you live in, I don't know, Denver, where you're living at real high altitude, then yeah, go for it, because you need as much air as you can get. Your actual KPA in your manifold is going to be lower just because you're not spinning the supercharger fast enough to suck in any of that thin air. You know, where my car might make 10.5 pounds of boost, somebody up there might only make 8.5 pounds of boost. And that's significant. So yeah, you pulley it up, you get a little bit more power out of it. But if you're at sea level or near sea level and you've only got access to 91, you've got to remember that you're already riding your knock sensors the way that it sits. And although, you know, most tuners will, at the very least on a stock car, even without adding any fuel to it, you're going to, you know, kill the knock sensors by about 15%, just to try to get rid of some false knock. The reality is that the car will ride the knock sensors on 91 octane pretty hard. I mean, I'll put it to you like this. My car will ride the knock sensors on 93 octane. So you got to be a little bit careful there. And yeah, there is some false knock that I've since gone in and, against my better judgment, kind of gave it a little bit more wiggle room on the knock sensors, but I'm still under 15%, just barely. But 91 octane is a little bit different cat, and I don't recommend throwing the kitchen sink at a car on 91 octane if for no other reason than it's already hard enough to rely on 93 octane to be a reliable fuel. If you take that same questionable reliability and move that over to 91, you might be dealing with 90 octane or a high 89 octane for a bad tank of fuel. I can tell you this, I have run into a bad tank of gas with my car, and I did last weekend. And the car was just pulling timing. I'm going, what in the hell is the deal here? Part of it was false knock. I mean, I had a weird spike. It didn't spike high enough on the knock sensor to show real knock. It just spiked enough to piss off the freaking tables when it did it. So anyway, kind of a one-off situation, but you can run into a bad tank of gas. And again, a bad tank of 93 is 91. A bad tank of 91 could be bad. So throwing more boost at the car isn't going to help you too much in that respect. So just know that going into it. Shawnee, 309 gears should have been stock, but then the red eye would have been less special. Well, I can tell you this, the red eye gets 309 gears as an option and the Hellcat doesn't, which I think is a freaking crime. But no, I agree with you. 309 gears should have definitely come stock in these cars. I think you're finding that out already, brother. Sean, saying Patrick Vade. Oh, he's talking about Patrick Vade. Yeah, Sean raced a 6-speed Scat Pack for a long time. But I think he figured out pretty quickly that these automatics are so prevalent for a reason. He's saying, but I'm driving an automatic Hellcat now, enough said. Well, you know, that's, I mean, what more can you say? And, you know, realistically, I mean, when we're talking about these modern cars, especially something as heavy as a Hellcat, you need the torque multiplication of a torque converter to really get things working for you. And to be honest with you, it's always been a bit of a breakover point for me at about 3,800 pounds, to where at that point the automatic is just going to be easier on parts and it's going to be better all the way around. When you're trying to get that much mass moving, the shock load of a manual transmission can, well, you can really start to break some parts at that point, just because getting the initial inertia of the thing is going to be tough. That said, also, you know, slipping the clutch and everything else becomes a major part of what you're going to be doing. You can't just sidestep the clutch the way you used to do back in the day. You know, put a set of slicks on the thing, rev the eyeballs right out of it, and then sidestep the clutch, start banging gears. It just doesn't really work like that with these big cars. Clutches can't handle it. So, you know, it's all about weight at that point. And you know, 3,800 pounds is a pretty good number for me. Anything lighter than that, manual transmission will be a ball. Anything heavier than that, it's going to be a bit of a hindrance. Let's see. Symphonics is asking, how are those new 10-speed Camaros performing at the track compared to the Scats and 5.0s? On paper, they all seem extremely close. And they are, and it's a driver's race at that point, right? But here's basically how it works out. So no matter what, the Scat Pack gets out. Yellow, 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 green. Bam, Scat Pack gets out. There's a three-way race. Scat Pack is out, and they're all on, let's say, a drag pack. Scat Pack gets out to the 60-foot first. Camaro's in second with the Mustang in tow. As the 8th mile comes along, Scat Pack will typically still be in first place with the Camaro slightly reeling it in, with the Mustang actually hard charging, hit the 1,000-foot mark, and it's anybody's race. Typically with the Mustang and the Scat Pack being practically door handle to door handle, with the Mustang coming up really hard on a hard charge and then going through the traps. Again, it's anybody's race at that point. That's really how close all of these cars are, with the Mustang typically having the stronger mile an hour, at least so far as I've seen at the drag strip. And we're talking about, 10-speed automatic with a 355 gear, whatever the performance pack is, up against the Camaro. But here's the funny thing. The Mustang has got all of them in mile an hour. The Scat Pack has got them all to the 8th, and will either win the race or be in second place, all things considered. So, how does it all play out? Well, again, it's what driving experience do you want? And if you've got a Camaro to your left and a Mustang to the right, that Camaro is going to not be as good all the way down the track as one or the other, and it just never really lives up to its potential. Again, the Camaro with a different gear, just a gear swap, will do wonders to change what that car is going to run like. But you got to want to buy the Camaro, right? You've got to want to be a part of that club, if you want to call it that, up against the Camaro, up against the Mustang and the Challenger. And unfortunately, there's just too many people not buying the car. It's too hard to see out of. It doesn't play well with the female demographic the way that the Mustang does, in terms of just buying demographic in this case. The girls just like the Mustangs better. They're more comfortable. The interior of the Mustang is better. They don't offer the muscle car feel that the Challenger does. You don't get that light the tires up at will feeling out of that car that you do with the Challenger. So, I don't know. And it's not as roomy, and it's not as big. And it's just, again, that's how it does at the drag strip. But you start to take everything else into consideration, it almost doesn't matter how that car runs at the drag strip, because you're not going to see that many running at the drag strip anyway. SRT Cat, would 100 octane be a noticeable difference in power on a stock Hellcat then? Well, I can tell you this, my car really likes 100 octane. As far as what the difference is, man, it's hard to say. Maybe half a tenth. It depends on the quality of the 93 octane that you're running with. I like the 100 octane as a safety measure. A couple of gallons on a half a tank of gas will definitely add a margin of safety to your car. So there's that. I would say take the conditions that you're running in really more than anything else as part of the consideration for running the fuel. If you're running in low DA conditions, say anything less than, say anything less than 500 feet, it might be a good idea to throw some 100 octane in the car. But in stock form, if the car is stock, it's got stock sensor, knock sensor settings, or even slightly modified knock sensor settings on 93 octane with stock timing, you'll be fine. It's fine. But again, picking up power, man, I don't know. The jury's a little bit still out on that, but I will tell you this, my car, I can tell you what my car doesn't like, and maybe that'll help you more than anything else. It does not like 104 Sunoco. If I have run too hot of a mixture of 104 in the car, in other words, just too much of a percentage of 104 in my car, it doesn't respond well to it. I've actually had it lose mile an hour of all things on 104, whereas 100 it just seems to be, just happy. I think on 100 it seems to be just happy. I think I may have misspoke there, but what I was thinking about as I was saying that is, the 100 octane seems to be kind of a balancing deal. In other words, it just makes sure that I've got at least 93 octane in the tank. If I've got a bad tank of gas, then a couple of gallons of 100 octane makes that bad tank of gas go away. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. So Fox saying, yeah, it seems like General Motors is making the Camaro more of a track weapon than a drag strip weapon. Well, here's the problem. I mean, track weapon how? People aren't buying it to run at a closed circuit, and the 1LE is a great car. It's the problem with the Camaro is the 1LE is a really good car, but it's just, the way that transmission is geared, the manual. I mean, you're just legging this thing out forever. There's no excitement to that car. There's no romance to that car the way that there is with the Mustang or the Challenger, or the Charger for that matter. And I think that is the biggest killer for the Camaro. There's nothing that, it's a little too clinical almost in its approach, but it's not quite as clinical as the Mustang. I don't know, there's just something about that car that just doesn't evoke any emotion with me. And I want it to. I like Camaros a lot. I'm a huge fan of Camaros. But just not that one. And it just doesn't do enough for me. And it's not the Camaro of old. And this is the problem that I've got. The Camaro, like a Gen 3. Let's talk about a Gen 3 Camaro for a minute. The Gen 3 Camaro was always the bigger car, the bigger engine, the bigger torque number or whatever to the smaller, lighter Mustang. It always had that place, right? An 87 Mustang versus an 87 Camaro, which way do you go, right? Well, the problem is that they no longer hold that place. That bigger, bigger engine, bigger interior, whatever, you already know where I'm going with this. That's the Challenger. So they don't hold that place anymore. And again, being the middle kid in this situation is not the place you want to be. And then Gods is saying, yeah, at this point, the Camaro is more of a sports car than a pony car. Well, yeah, kind of. But the problem that you're going to face with the Camaro is that it's hard to see out of. Number one, you'll hear that all the time. But, again, there's just nothing about the Camaro that is evoking an emotional response from the general public the way that the Challenger and the Mustang does. And again, it's going to take a lot more than just a minor facelift to get the general public to, start to pay attention. Of course, you can make the case here. Oh man, this is going to suck to say. All right, so look, you can make the case and say, okay, well, if you sold it at $27,000, would it get my attention personally? Well, yeah, but it's still a freaking direct injected engine. And plenty of enthusiasts have been having problems with, thinking about direct injection and performance and, coking the intake valves and everything else. It just seems like it's an extra step that you got to take with these things. Whereas the LS used to be the anvil of the performance engine community. I mean, you want something that made a lot of power, you built an LS and you just beat on it mercilessly, and they seemingly wouldn't break, or if they did, it was because you did something dumb. Now you got to deal with coking intake valves. You got to deal with the expense and the cost and everything else that's associated with that car. Now it's just, I don't know. I don't. And the other thing too is I don't want to think of the Camaro as the lost leader, but if that's going to be the case, again, it can't win the fight based on price alone. It has to win in performance, or it just doesn't matter. It's either that, or Chevrolet needs to be very involved with that car in terms of modifications. The way that Ford Performance Parts is with the Mustang, which is really, to be honest, what can separate that car apart from the rest of the field, is that if you want a GT350 intake, you can buy that for your Mustang, et cetera, right? Chevrolet's going to have to be able to do the same thing with the Camaro, and that is an area where Mopar, FCA, Dodge, whatever you want to call it, is so far removed from the enthusiast that it's not even funny. I mean, you got look, if I went to a Chevrolet dealership right now, or a Ford dealership, and said, I want to buy a GT500 hood, or I want to buy a ZL1 wing, or I want to buy whatever. Why? Because I want to hang it on my wall. How about that? They're more than happy to sell me those parts. But I can't go to a Dodge dealership and order up a Demon hood. I can't order up a red-eye drive shaft. If I'm the general public, I can't order a lot of the parts that come on those cars. I can't just order that part, and that has turned a lot of guys off from Mopar. So if it's anywhere that the competition has a leg up, it's in their parts department and in their support of the vehicles, where Mopar doesn't support the enthusiast. Chevrolet and Ford certainly seem like they do. It's to a much greater level for sure than what Dodge does. Let's see. Gods is asking, am I better off buying a Fox body or a 98 Firebird for the drag strip? 98 Firebird because it'll be LS based. And for all the right reasons, you will go that way if I were you. They are very, very, very well. I mean, they're as loved, if not more loved, than the Fox body by the aftermarket, if that's even possible. And again, it's LS based, which means you can literally put whatever you want into that car and be more competitive by today's standard. Let's see. Oh, Symphonic saying, yeah, and since they removed Al Oppenheiser from the Camaro team, it's going to be tough. I agree with that. Billy Owen is saying, fellow Hellcat owner here, what are your thoughts on adding long tube headers to run more efficient, but you'll lose some boost? Is it safe to say you can run one of the 272 pulleys on 93 compared to a 285 without headers? So, oh man, yeah, so this gets into a bit of a push me, pull you type of a situation here. So running long tubes and no cats in this case, yeah, you'll lose a little bit of boost. You can pick up some of the boost with that 275. You will definitely need a tune to go along with that. Man, and you'll be running on 93. I'll tell you this, the margin, the difference between the 275 with long tubes and 93 octane and the tune that would support that on 93 octane and do it well long term, you would be real hard pressed to get significantly better than a very well tuned stock boost Hellcat. And I know that kind of flies in the face of conventional wisdom, but in practical terms, yes, to answer the question, it would be better to run a set of 2-inch primary long tube headers, not the 1 7/8. Run the 2-inch primary long tubes with no cats, 275 upper, and just, I cringe by saying this because I don't like it. I don't like the combination. Run a pinned crank, and with the only caveat here is you're gonna pick up power, but the stock Hellcat cam can't really do a lot with long tubes, but there is still some scavenging because you have more exhaust duration. And that's why I'm saying go with the 2-inch, because the LSA is wider and you need the extra flow capacity of the 2-inch to make it work. And it'll work well on the street. The 275 with the stock lower, it's a gain, but it's not a huge gain. And I don't want to, because you do lose cylinder pressure, and I don't want you to think that, you know, this is like it's a way to get around the 93 octane gremlin here, but the same problems you're going to run into with running, you know, like a 285 on no headers, you know, basically just stock manifolds. You're going to run into the same problem with the 275 and long tubes in terms of fuel quality. And again, we're pushing more air at this point through the engine, so you're going to be running more fuel. It's going to be more efficient. especially after about 5,000 RPM. I don't know that 93 octane is as reliable as it could be for that combination, but plenty of guys run it and seem to do just fine. I would say just keep the RPMs down. Don't be tempted to stretch the RPM out on those cars. Maximum shift point of about 6,500 RPM will make that thing, you know, you'll be deep into the tens with that combination. I would say run that and have a ball with that. But if you want any more out of that car, and I mean any more out of that thing, you're going to need to make the switch to E85 and just run a 10% lower and call it good. And at that point, long tubes, from what I've seen, really didn't make any difference in terms of power. In fact, it was almost identical on the dyno from a car that had, and these are like literally the exact same pulley ratios, ATI 10% lower, 275 upper. The only difference is one car had factory manifolds with no cats, and the other car had long tubes with no cats. And aside from the one had a 309 gear, the other had a 262, aside from the correction factor between the 309 and the 262 on the dyno, there wasn't enough separating the two to be able to tell the difference. Maybe just in driving impressions, a little bit better tip-in torque with the long tubes, but I mean, damn, you're trying to ask what's the difference between 790 foot-pounds of torque and 800 foot-pounds of torque. Where do you find it? It's tough. So, man, I don't want to discourage you from doing that or putting that combination on the car. Just know that you're still going to be running into the same issues with fuel quality, except a little bit more, because even though you're dumping some cylinder pressure with the long tubes, you're still running more air through the engine. You're just cramming, you're pushing more air into the engine with those pulleys. The extra efficiency is not going to make the 93 any less prone to detonation at that point. And of course, the quality again. So hopefully I didn't beat that one to death. Triple Threat saying, I drove a new C7 Grand Sport today, not impressed. My 392 felt stronger and my Dodge sounds way better. The C7 does handle better, but not a lot of good that does me in town. Man, I tell you what, that's another area where I don't understand Chevrolet. Chevrolet has all the technology they need to make that 6.2 run just as good, if not better, than the 6.4. But again, gear ratios in the 6.4 or in the HP 90 or HP 70 in this case, notwithstanding, the Vet kind of suffers the same fate. It just doesn't have the gearing to go along with to match up properly with the power output of that car. It just doesn't. I mean, how do you make a performance car and then try to shackle it with fuel economy style gearing? I don't know. It just drives me nuts. And Chevrolet's just lost their way, man. I'm sorry. And I like them all, man. I'm a car guy. I like all of them. I just happen to fly the Mopar flag the highest. But, I'll take I'd love to have my hands on a Gen 3 Camaro. I'd love to get my hands on another Fox body. The new Coyote stuff is awesome too. Love playing with those. But yeah, I don't know, man. Camaro just kills me. Sean E, hey, thanks, man. Appreciate that contribution to the cause. Wait a minute. Triple Threat also, thank you very much. I appreciate that, guys. Yeah, that's awesome. Appreciate that, fellas. Thank you so much. Man, big time. Thank you very much. 309's making the car livelier, still breaking them in. Man, I'll tell you what. You have to get done driving that thing around. You need to break them in the right way. But no, you do need to be careful with it just for, give it a day or two. It'll be all right. Just drive it around and have fun. No hard launches. Sorry, here we go. God's is asking, are there any Australian muscle cars that you wish were made here in the States? Any of the Utes. Dodge actually had a Ute back in the day that would have been sweet. you know, they've got the Bara inline 6 over there, which is sick to death. If you're not familiar with that, it's a 4-liter inline turbo 6-cylinder that is kind of like a 2JZ, just with a stroker kit from the factory. Lots of guys over there making a ton of power with those cars. So yeah, give me a Falcon Ute with a Bara turbo and turn me loose, man. I would build something sick out of that. So if anything, it'd be that car. Triple Threat saying, not sure I should even sell my Charger at this point. Man, keep it. If you love it, keep it. Saying, I love my Charger, but hoping to get a supercar. Not sure Vet is the car for me. I like the C8, but I'd wait at least 2 years to let them get the bugs worked out. It's a good plan on that one. That's a brand new combination, brand new platform. So yeah, definitely a good idea to let them do that. Kind of get the bugs worked out of it. I can tell you this though, the Vet, once they get, well, let's say they get everything right from the factory to begin with, that Vet is going to be sick as hell in person. So definitely looking forward to what folks will be able to get out of that car here in the next year or two. I think you might be surprised as to the amount of mayhem you can have with one of those cars. Troll Vet saying maybe there's a Charger wide body, Charger Hellcat wide body is future, but yeah, that's a good looking car, by the way. And again, Triple Threat, thank you very much, Sean. Thank you, sir. Appreciate the contributions, guys. Trumax saying, Pedal Commander, good or gadget? Man, I tell you what, they're not bad. They're good. They do what they're designed to do. I mean, look, they're designed to make the vehicle feel a bit more lively underfoot. They also have a cool eco mode if you are, you know, on a long trip or whatever and just really trying to watch that fuel economy, or you're in town and you're just, you know, just cruising or whatever, throw the thing in eco mode. That's also a fun, fun thing. Or, you know, it's kind of like a default valet too. You can put the thing in eco mode and just throw the controller, you know, down there by your seat. But no, man, I like them. Like I say, they do serve a purpose, and it's one of the few modifications that lives up to all the hype and then some. If you don't plan on putting a tune on your vehicle, if you're worried about warranty or anything like that, but you just want the car or truck or whatever you're driving to feel more lively, man, Pedal Commander is a great way to go. So, you know, all it is it's you know, if it's telling the computer that half throttle is really a little bit less than half throttle. In other words, the amount of pedal that you're giving the car will translate into, I'm giving the pedal, you know, the car thinks you're just giving it more pedal. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can do the same thing with your foot, but again, it just makes the car, your perception of performance is just enhanced. And that's why, yeah, I like them. You can do the same thing in a tune, obviously, but again, if you're worried about you know, the tattletale codes and everything else that you can get by putting a tune on one of these modern cars, again, Pedal Commander is a good way to go. It makes the car feel more lively, and it's not going to hurt anything. And that's a great question. It's a good segue into the original topic of discussion here, is what modifications work. Oddly enough, I'm a big fan of the Pedal Commander for the reasons why I was just talking about. And weirdly enough, it's one of the few mild modifications that you can do to the car that will yield an immediate result. You can remove it whenever you want if you're going to trade the car in. You can use it on other vehicles, and it just basically can, in some cases, especially if you're getting the same car or something, you know, the same family, plug right in and you can just keep using it. It's actually pretty versatile in terms of a modification. Oddly enough, a lot of guys think that it adds power. Again, it doesn't. It just makes the car feel more lively. Let's see. Sean E is saying, I had a Pedal Commander, or he says he has a Pedal Commander. I had it on my 392. It is fun to play with. It's purely up to you whether it's worth $300. And, you know, that is part of the trade-off is, you know, is the Pedal Commander worth the money that you're going to spend on it? And, man, I'd say it is. You know, again, if you're not going to be making changes to the tune, I say go for it. But if you're making changes to the tune anyway, it's a waste of money because you can just change whatever you're doing to the car in the tune. But there's a catch. You got to change tunes every time you do that. With a pedal commander, you can have whatever protocol in that tune for driver command torque, which is the pedal. But you can change it up whenever you want with a pedal commander. And actually, in that respect, it can work as a supplemental modification as well as a standalone modification. Yeah, this thing's got uses all over the place. So yeah, in short, I do like them. But again, it's a modification that doesn't add any power. Just like a transmission tune doesn't add any power. One of the best bang for the buck modifications you can do to any of these Mopars is that transmission tune. And too many guys get wrapped up in, you know, well, how much power will this tune make? What will that tune do for me? Whatever the case is. Power, it's always power, power, power. But nobody ever really seems to think about, well, how do I, you know, just in driving the thing around, you know, partial throttle downshifts, you know, partial throttle upshifts, you know, how lively does the car feel when you're just driving the thing around? That's what makes more sense to change to me than just trying to throw more power at these things. Because you got to remember, especially, you know, Hellcats, 392s, yeah, 5.7 is not really in this conversation yet, but they're already kind of at a pretty solid limit for what you can get out of the car from an engine tune alone. You know, on a 392, you know, 25 horsepower is a pretty big ask, but that 25 horsepower along with a transmission tune, well, that's going to equate to, you know, you know, the car running an 1190 or a 12.4, let's say stock, to running mid 11s on the same tire, same conditions. That transmission tune will take you a lot farther down the rung, so to speak, in terms of ET. Obviously, you have to tune parts of the engine, though, to work with the trans tune. But the core of the conversation still remains the same. That trans tune will get you a lot more in terms of performance, but adds zero power to the car as well. So again, you know, the big mods to me that make the biggest difference with these Mopars, believe it or not, have nothing to do with making more power. And to that point, I've actually, in my tune with my car, I've done things to it in the tune to not really cheat more power out of it, just, you know, playing with some spark modifiers that after taking the car to the drag strip, I've looked at it, looked at the data and thought, screw it. I'm just going to go back to stock spark modifiers because timing, you know, doesn't really make the big difference that you would think with these things in terms of results at the drag strip. And yeah, you can eke a little bit more mile an hour out of it on the big end, but if that little bit extra mile an hour doesn't equate to, you know, 2/10, you know, maybe it equates to a tenth, it's hard to justify. And I get it, at these speeds, a tenth of a second is about a car length, but man, a car length is not that much when you're talking about, you know, how the car performs or drives on the street. And I'm not really all that, I don't know, what's the best way to put it? I'm not that excited about taking unnecessary risks when it comes to tuning. I'm one to err more on the side of caution. And, you know, if I leave a tenth on the table, or if I leave a tenth and a mile an hour on the table, I'm all right with that, knowing that it's going to be durable long term. And it's funny because, guys, look, everybody's, you know, is comparing one dyno number to the next, to the next, to the next. In the business, dynos are just used as tools to make sure that the tune is working properly, that all systems are functioning as normal. That number that you're going for in terms of dyno, the issue that you run into, number one, is all the, you know, one dyno is not the same from the day to the next day to the next day in and of itself, much less trying to compare that inaccuracy or inconsistency with the inconsistency of every other dyno that's out there. But I will say this, it's interesting how, just talking about dynos now for just a second, my SRT 392 was probably the lowest dynoing 392 that I had ever dynoed, and it's my own car. And I know what all was done to that thing to try to eke out power, but I ran in really good air. I ran an 1130 with that car. So, in that respect, does the dyno number matter? Well, not really. At least not when I'm beating cars that made significantly more power than mine on the dyno, yet my car was quicker. Where did the extra ET come from? Came from a transmission tune that I spent a lot of time on. Is that to say that those other cars might have been a little bit quicker with that transmission tune? Maybe. But on the days that I raced them, they lost. So what can I say? But again, if the question is what modifications work the best, so far as I can tell, it's the ones that don't get you any power, but get you the more efficient use of the power that you're already making. And that's in that trans tune. Let's see, 510 Card Dog saying, do you know if the Mopar engine controller for the 6.4 has multi-speed for radiator fans? Yes, it does. Can you change it in HP tuners? Yes, you can. It's in your systems menu. Fans, system fans, you're going to change your pulse width modulation to, you're going to drop it down to about 190 degrees, and then you're going to change your temperatures to like 1 for low speed, 187, medium, 192, and high speed, you want that to kick on at about 194 to 196. Same for fuel pump. Do you know if it stays on when the key is on, engine not running? No, it shuts off. Can you adjust that in the tune? No, you cannot adjust the fuel pump on. Not that I'm aware of. I think you have to jump the fuse box to make the fuel pump stay on all the time. You cannot do that in the tune that I can recall. But technically, you can change the fuel pressure. Trimming M is saying, interested in the HP 90 trans tune. Can you elaborate? Can I elaborate? Where do I begin? So, yeah, shift points, shift scheduling technically is what it's called. You've got line pressures. You've got oncoming clutch, offcoming clutch. You've got torque converter, enable, disable for different gears. You've got transmission rev limits that are in there. You've got all kinds of different parameters that you're going to change, not just where it shifts on upshift, but how it shifts on downshifts. God, there's so much to it. I mean, I'll put it to you like this, that to say that tuning a transmission is laborious is kind of an understatement. What you would need to do, because it's the most subjective part, right? Everybody's foot and the feel of that tune is going to be a little bit different. So, I don't know, man. Long story short, depending on what you've got and what you're up against in terms of fuel quality and everything else, and what you've done to the engine in general, basically. Hellcats are a little bit different than the 392 cars or 5.7s. Only in that their trans tune's already really good from the factory, but yeah, there's a lot you have to change, and it can be tedious. Just a change of 1 or 2% in values will be the difference with the car slowing down or speeding up in the quarter mile, and or how the car feels going down the road just at partial throttle downshifts. There's so much to it, man. I wish I could elaborate, but I mean, you'd almost have to just take a class on it. There's just so much to it, especially when you get to the oncoming clutch, offgoing clutch, shift timing. In other words, how fast do you want it to complete a shift, slip time. It just, the list goes on and on and on, man. But there's a lot to it, suffice it to say. 510 Card Dog saying, almost ready to fire up the duster. Thank you, bro. Got the fist pump. I like it. Shawnee's checking out, saying, good night, everybody. Looking forward to racing this Saturday. Potentially 55 degrees. Jealous. Get out there and have some fun. Keep me posted, brother. 510 Card Dog saying, thank you. Thank you very much. Triple Thread saying, my rear end is making noise when making sharp left-hand turns. Dodge says it needs a rear end oil conditioner for the rear end clutches. Have you heard of this? And then he's saying they want $161. Car is still under warranty. Dodge says it's a maintenance item. No, it's not really a maintenance item. The conditioner is actually friction modifier, and it probably just needs to be drained and refilled. I know that they had some issues with that as a TSB. A lot of guys complaining about rear end noise. Don't let them tell you that it's a maintenance thing. Although that being said, every single one of the Mopars that I've ever driven had a whiny rear end. So there's that to consider anyway. God, my voice is cratering here. Triple Thread is saying thank you. Well, guys, I'm going to wrap it up with that. Thank y'all very much for hanging out with me this evening. My voice is crashing, and I got to wake up super early. But thank y'all very much for hanging out. Appreciate everybody that came on board this evening. Want to say thank you guys to y'all that contributed to the cause. Is always very much appreciated. And I'm looking forward to getting you guys some reliable data this weekend at the drag strip. Got a new set of tires coming. Hopefully we'll have some decent track prep. And with that being said, we're going to try out a couple of just real minor changes to the tune. Max torque values, things like that. Nothing major. So basically our Little Miss Revlon with stock timing with a scotch more fuel, a bunch of stock parameters left in the engine tune, and a trans tune. Well, we're going after that 1054 number again, assuming that we can get some decent traction this time. Yeah, track prep was questionable. But you know, we're going to try to get her back into the 50s, and I'm proving over and over again that this red-eye drive shaft is the absolute best thing since sliced bread for a Hellcat. So, especially one with a 309 gear that you're dragging up and down that drag strip. But again, y'all have a great week. Glad you can make it, and I hope to see you on the next one. That's a wrap. Adios.